The first thing he saw was the light. It sliced through the blinds like a blade, stabbing his eyes with a brightness that felt almost violent after years of darkness. His lips cracked as he tried to speak, but all that came out was a raspy gasp, half a word, half a plea. Then he saw her. She stood at the foot of his bed, clipboard in hand, her skin the color of rich mahogany, her posture straight as a soldier's. But it wasn't her uniform, or the way she looked at him like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. It was her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who knew him. "Kenneth Rourke," she said, her voice steady, almost ceremonial. "Welcome back." Kenneth blinked, his brain a foggy swamp where memories floated, half-formed and useless. 10 years. That's what they told him later. He'd been gone for 10 years. In his mind, he was still standing on the Senate floor, red-faced and shouting about traditional values and protecting the integrity of America. He remembered cameras flashing, his voice booming. He remembered the applause. He didn't remember her, but she remembered him. The nurse's name was Angela Brooks. She'd been assigned to his care 2 weeks before he woke, though she had known about Kenneth Rourke long before that, back when his name was still in the headlines, back when his speeches dripped with contempt for people like her. She'd been 22 the first time she'd seen him on TV. It was during a Senate hearing, and he was making the case against a bill designed to address police brutality in black communities. He'd called it race-baiting propaganda and accused its supporters of dividing the nation. Angela remembered the way he said "those people," like the words were sour in his mouth. She remembered, too, the way her father had muted the TV, his jaw tight. "That man doesn't know the first thing about what it means to be American," he'd said. Back then, Kenneth Rourke was untouchable, charismatic, well-spoken, and utterly convinced of his own righteousness. But now, he was just a pale shadow of that man, hooked to machines, blinking at her like a newborn. "Water," Kenneth croaked, his throat raw. Angela poured it without a word, holding the cup to his lips. As he drank, his eyes kept darting to her, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Finally, he rasped, "Do I know you?" A muscle in her jaw twitched. Not yet. It was an odd answer, but before he could ask more, the door opened and Dr. Patel walked in, brisk and smiling. "Senator Rourke," he said warmly, "this is nothing short of a miracle. 10 years in a coma, and know where you are." Kenneth's voice was still gravel, but the old pride flared in his tone. "Still a senator?" Patel hesitated. Angela didn't. "No," she said. "You're just Kenneth Rourke now." The words landed like a slap. Kenneth blinked at her, as if the world had tilted slightly off its axis. He didn't remember losing his seat. He didn't remember the scandal. He didn't remember that the last time his name was in the papers, it wasn't for politics, it was for something far uglier. That night, when the hospital quieted to a hum, Angela sat beside his bed. She hadn't planned to speak to him, not yet, but something in his gaze earlier had made her restless. "You want to know why I'm here?" she asked softly. His head turned slowly on the pillow. "I volunteered for this floor," she said. "Specifically for you." Kenneth frowned. "Why?" Angela's eyes locked on his. "Because I have something to tell you. Something from before your accident." For a moment, the only sound was the slow beeping of the heart monitor. Kenneth's breath was shallow. "What?" he asked. Angela leaned closer, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You destroyed someone I loved." He didn't remember at first. Of course he didn't. Politicians like Kenneth Rourke didn't remember the people they stepped on. They were just numbers and speeches, anecdotes to twist into talking points. But Angela remembered. Her brother Marcus had been 17 when the police pulled him over. They said he matched the description of a robbery suspect. They said he resisted. Marcus had no weapon, but he had a skin color that made him dangerous in their eyes. When Marcus died in custody, there was outrage. The community demanded justice. A bill was introduced, Marcus's Lotto, create stricter oversight for police misconduct. Kenneth Rourke had led the charge against it. He'd gone on national television, called the bill a hysterical overreaction, painted Marcus as a troubled young man from a broken home. He'd quoted crime statistics as if they were gospel, twisting them until Marcus was no longer a boy in handcuffs, but a shadowy threat to the American way of life. The bill failed. The officers kept their jobs, and Angela's parents never smiled the same way again. "I remember now," Kenneth whispered, his face paling further. "Do you?" Angela's tone was sharp, but there was something else in it too, something almost like pain. Do you remember the way you looked into the cameras and made people believe my brother deserved to die? Kenneth closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the Senate chamber, the microphones, the press. He saw himself confident, sure, untouchable. He didn't see Marcus. Not once. Until now. Angela didn't want his apology, not yet. Words were cheap, and she had learned the hard way that the people with the most power to harm you often thought they could fix it with a well-timed sorry. No, she wanted something else. I'm not here to forgive you, she said. I'm here to see if 10 years in the dark taught you anything about what it's like to have no voice. Kenneth's mouth opened, then closed. Because for 10 years, Angela continued, you were nothing. No speeches, no headlines, just a body in a bed. And nobody was fighting to bring you back. The words hit harder than she expected. She saw it in the way his eyes glistened, the way his breath hitched. And for the first time, Kenneth Rourke didn't have a single thing to say. Kenneth lay awake long after Angela's footsteps faded down the hallway. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept looping through her words, the accusation in her voice, the certainty with which she had said his name like she was pinning him to a wall. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not when he was a senator. Not when he was a man who could make or break careers with a phone call. He used to be the one asking the questions. Now, he was the one waiting for answers. The next morning, Angela returned, clipboard in hand, as always. But there was a tightness around her eyes today, like she hadn't slept either. How's the pain? She asked. I've had worse, Kenneth said automatically, though his body screamed otherwise. His voice carried the faintest trace of the old arrogance, and Angela caught it instantly. Save the tough guy act, she said flatly. You can barely lift a cup of water without shaking. He almost snapped back, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she moved, efficient, precise, but with an undercurrent of restraint, as if she was holding back a storm. Finally, he said, you told me last night I destroyed someone you loved. Your brother. Her hand stilled. Yes. And you came here to tell me that? After 10 years. Angela set the clipboard down, her gaze never leaving his. I came here because I knew you'd wake up one day, and I needed to look you in the eye when I told you the rest. The rest. The words slid into him like ice water. He didn't know what was worse, that there was more to the story, or that she had carried it with her all this time, waiting for this exact moment. What? Rest? He asked. Angela took a deep breath. Marcus wasn't just some name in your speeches. He wasn't just a troubled young man from a broken home. He was a kid with a scholarship offered to Howard. He played trumpet like it was breathing. He had a laugh that used to make my mother burn dinner because she'd forget to check the stove. Her voice trembled on that last sentence, but she didn't look away. And the night he died, she continued, he wasn't alone. Kenneth swallowed. Who was he with? Angela's eyes darkened. Me. For a moment, he couldn't speak. You? I was in the passenger seat, Angela said. Her tone clipped, almost surgical. We were coming back from a school event. The cops pulled us over. Said we rolled through a stop sign. They ordered Marcus out of the car. I kept telling them, he's just a kid. He's my brother. They didn't care. Her voice hardened. When they took him, they told me to go home. I never saw him alive again. Kenneth felt the air thicken in the room. He could almost see Itwo teenagers in the dark, red and blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror, the tension so sharp it could slice skin. And then, nothing. He had turned that night into a soundbite, a political win. And now, the witness was standing right in front of him. Angela. He started, but she held up a hand. Don't say my name like we're friends, she said. We're not. He shut his mouth. I've lived with this for 10 years, she said, her voice low. And every year, I'd see your name in the papers. You'd be giving speeches about law and order, shaking hands with police unions, calling people like my brother criminals before they even got a trial. Kenneth's stomach twisted. He had done all of that. And at the time, it had felt righteous. Necessary. Now it felt like a stain he couldn't scrub out. Later that afternoon, Dr. Patel came in for routine checks, but Kenneth barely heard him. His mind was somewhere else 10 years in the past. On a Senate floor, he could suddenly remember in painful detail. He remembered the day the Marcus Brooks bill was voted down. The celebration in his office afterward. The champagne. The aides slapping him on the back. And now, all he could see in those memories was a young man's face, one he'd never bothered to learn at the time. The second night, Angela stayed late again. She didn't sit this time. She stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the city lights flicker outside. Why tell me now? Kenneth asked finally. Why not years ago? She didn't turn around. Because you wouldn't have listened. He had no argument for that. Angela continued, her voice quieter now. There's something else you need to know. Marcus's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was the catalyst for something bigger. Bigger than you ever knew. Kenneth frowned. What do you mean? Angela turned, and for the first time, there was something almost dangerous in her eyes. The night Marcus died, the police report said I went straight home. That's what you repeated on TV. But that's not what happened. Kenneth felt his pulse quicken. Then what did happen? Angela stepped closer, her shadow falling across his bed. I followed them, she said. I followed the car they put him in. I saw where they took him. I saw who went inside that building. Her voice was steady, but her hands curled into fists. And one of them, she said slowly, was your campaign donor. Kenneth's breath caught. What? Officer James Calder, she said. You know the name. He donated $20,000 to your re-election campaign. And you, she jabbed a finger toward him, stood on that Senate floor, and called him a hero while my brother's body was still warm. He tried to protest, to say he didn't know, but the truth Wash might have known. Not in detail, maybe, but in the way politicians know which hands feed them. Money moved through politics like blood through veins. You didn't always ask where it came from, because you didn't want to know. He faltered. I don't remember. Angela's voice was cold. Then maybe I'll help you remember. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. She placed it on the tray beside his bed. What's on it? He asked. Evidence, she said. From that night. Things I couldn't release before. Things that show exactly who covered it up. Kenneth stared at the flash drive like it might burn through the metal tray. For the first time since he'd woken, he felt funnet, the kind that comes from physical weakness, but the kind that coils around your soul when you realize the past might still have claws. Angela stepped back toward the door. I'll be back tomorrow. You have one night to decide if you want to see what's on that drive. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the shadows creeping across the hospital walls. Kenneth didn't sleep. The years in the coma had been nothing gone absence, a blank space. But this was heavy, real. By morning, his decision was made. When Angela returned, he said only 2 words. Show me. Angela didn't speak right away. She just held his gaze for a long, unblinking moment, as if she was measuring his resolve. Then, with deliberate care, she picked up the flash drive from the tray, slipped it into a small black tablet she'd brought with her, and turned the screen so only he could see. Before I press play, she said, you need to understand this is going to rip open everything you thought you knew about that night. And about yourself. Kenneth's chest tightened. Do it. The first image was grainy, the kind of footage you'd expect from an old streetlight security camera. The timestamp in the corner read, October 14th, 2013, 11:08 p.m. Kenneth squinted at the screen. 2 young figures, Marcus and Angela, appeared at the edge of the frame, walking toward a beat-up sedan. Marcus was laughing, his trumpet case slung over one shoulder. The sound wasn't there, but Kenneth could imagine the warmth of that laugh, the easy confidence of a kid who thought the world might actually be fair. Then, the flashing lights. 2 police cruisers pulled up fast, cutting off the car before Marcus could even reach the driver's door. The officers stepped out, one of them tall and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head. Calder, Kenneth whispered. Angela didn't confirm. She didn't have to. The next part was worse. The footage switched to a dashcam view. It showed Marcus being patted down while Angela stood off to the side, her hands raised. There was no resisting, no shouting, just Marcus speaking, calmly at first, then with a note of fear as they cuffed him. They put him in the back of one cruiser. The dashcam stayed fixed on Angela, who was told to go home. The video ended. Kenneth exhaled slowly. That doesn't prove Calder killed him. Angela's eyes didn't waver. I'm not done. The tablet clicked, and the next video began. This one was from a parking lot camera outside an unmarked building. The police cruiser rolled in, stopping beside a side entrance. Calder got out, opened the back door, and pulled Marcus to his feet. Then another man stepped into from a man in a suit. Kenneth's heart dropped. No, yes, Angela said. That's Nathan Greer. Greer, Kenneth's former campaign manager. The man who had orchestrated his biggest Senate victories. The man who had told him, time and again, that our friends in law enforcement were untouchable allies. Kenneth watched as Greer spoke briefly to Calder, clapped him on the shoulder, then guided Marcus inside. Marcus's head was down. He was still cuffed. The timestamp showed they entered the building at 11:19 p.m. Marcus's official time of death was 12:04 a.m. Kenneth looked away from the screen, while rising in his throat. Why didn't you release this years ago? Angela's voice was cold steel. Because it wouldn't have mattered. Back then, Calder was a decorated officer with a spotless record. Greer was one of the most powerful political strategists in the state. And you, she pointed at him. You were their golden boy in the Senate. You had the kind of influence that could bury this before it even surfaced. Kenneth closed his eyes. He wanted to deny it, to claim he wouldn't have done such a thing. But the truth gnawed at him might not have ordered a cover-up, but he had benefited from it. His victories had been built, in part, on the silence of people like Angela. Angela tapped the screen again, freezing the image on Marcus being led inside. I held on to this because I wanted you to see it first. I wanted you to look at his face and remember what you took from him. From me. From my family. Her voice cracked, but her posture never wavered. Kenneth stared at the frozen frame. Marcus looked so young, so unaware of the fate waiting inside that building. A long silence stretched between them until Kenneth finally asked, "Why now? Why bring this to me after all these years?" Angela's jaw tightened. Because Greer's running for governor, and Calder is his campaign security chief. The words hit like a hammer. Kenneth sat back, the heart monitor picking up speed. You think I can stop them? Angela's eyes softened just enough to let a flicker of truth through. I know you can. He shook his head. I've been in a coma for a decade. I'm not even in politics anymore. You're still Kenneth Rourke, she said. People still know your name. You could blow this wide open with a single interview. You could make them answer for what they did. He almost laughed bitter, hollow. And why would I help you, after what you think of me? Angela stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. Because this is your only shot at redemption. The word echoed in his head long after she left the room. Redemption. It sounded almost laughable. Could a man like him even earn that? Or was it just a word people clung to when the guilt became too heavy to carry? That night, Kenneth dreamed not of the Senate, not of speeches, but of Marcus. The boy sat in a folding chair, trumpet in his lap, looking at Kenneth with quiet disappointment. You didn't even try, Marcus said. Kenneth woke up, drenched in sweat. The next morning, Dr. Patel came in with routine updates, but Kenneth barely heard him. His mind was already moving, the old political gears grinding back to life. He knew how to take someone down. He'd done it his whole career. But doing it now would mean detonating his own legacy. Greer wouldn't go quietly drag every skeleton out of Kenneth's closet. And Kenneth's closet was full. Still, the thought of doing nothing felt worse. When Angela returned that afternoon, Kenneth didn't waste time. If I do this, I'll need proof that ties Greer directly to Marcus's death. Not just video. I need documents. Witnesses. Angela's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I already have them. She handed him a thin folder. Inside were photocopies, internal memos, falsified reports, even a sworn statement from a retired officer who had been there that night. Why not go to the press yourself, he asked. I'm a nurse, she said simply. No one's going to put me on primetime news. But a former senator waking up from a 10-year coma to expose corruption? That's a headline. She was right, and they both knew it. Kenneth spent the next 2 days poring over the files, reading every damning word. With each page, his resolve hardened. On the third day, he called an old contact at the Washington Herald, a man who had once written flattering profiles of Senator Rourke. Dan, Kenneth said when the reporter answered. I've got a story for you, and it's going to ruin me. There was a pause on the line. Kenny, is this a joke? I heard you were. Not a joke, Kenneth interrupted. Meet me at County General. Bring a recorder. That night, as Angela prepared his four, Kenneth looked at her. If this works, they're going to come after both of us. Angela didn't flinch. I've been living in their shadow for 10 years. I'm not afraid of the light. For the first time, he believed her. By noon, the story had spread to every major network. Cable news played the footage on loop. A pale, frail Kenneth in his hospital bed, voice unsteady but sharp as he named Nathan Greer, Officer James Calder, and the events of that night. The grainy videos Angela had saved filled the screen. Marcus laughing with his trumpet, the flashing lights, Calder's heavy hand on his shoulder, Greer leading him into that building. The public reaction was volcanic. Greer's campaign issued a terse statement calling the allegations baseless, politically motivated lies from a disgraced former politician. Calder's lawyer claimed the footage was misinterpreted and taken out of context. But behind the bluster, they were rattled, and that made them dangerous. Angela felt at first a black SUV idling across from the hospital. Different men in suits hanging around the lobby, pretending to be visitors. One night, she came back from the vending machine to find Kenneth's room door slightly ajar, though she'd closed it when she left. Inside, he was awake, eyes narrowed. "Someone was here," he said. Angela's pulse kicked up. What did they do? Nothing. Just stood there for a minute. Watching. They both knew what it meant. The message wasn't subtle. The next morning, Kenneth's lawyer called. "They're threatening a defamation suit," he said. "Greer's people are pushing for an emergency injunction to block further publication of the footage." Kenneth laughed bitterly. Good. That means it's working. But privately, he wondered how long they could hold out. That night, as the city outside buzzed with election fever, Angela sat by Kenneth's bed. "You don't have to keep going," she said quietly. "You've done more than I ever thought you would." Kenneth looked at her, really looked at her. "You think this is about you now?" "Angela, I'm not doing this just for you. I'm doing it because I don't want the last thing I'm remembered for to be the worst thing I ever did." She didn't reply right away, but her eyes softened. 2 days later, the hospital received a bomb threat. The building was evacuated. Nothing was found, but Kenneth and Angela didn't believe for a second it was a coincidence. The police assigned a uniformed officer to guard Kenneth's door, but Angela didn't trust him. She recognized him from Calder's precinct. They needed to move. That night, Kenneth called Dan from the Herald. "Release the rest of it," he said. "All of it. All of it. Don't hold anything back." The next morning, the full trove of evidence went online: videos, memos, sworn statements, even Angela's personal testimony. It was raw, unfiltered, impossible to spin, and it broke the story wide open. The governor called for a special prosecutor. Greer suspended his campaign temporarily to fight the charges. Calder was placed on administrative leave, but the fight wasn't over. Kenneth's inbox, what remained of it after 10 years, filled with death threats. Angela's apartment was broken into, nothing stolen, just drawers pulled open, pictures smashed. When she told Kenneth, he said, "Move in here. At least I've got 4 walls and a guard." She almost laughed. "You think I want to live in a hospital room?" But she moved in anyway. One night, she found him staring out the window, lost in thought. "You ever wonder," he said, "if redemption's just impossible? Like no matter what you do, the scales never balance." Angela leaned on the windowsill beside him. "Maybe it's not about balancing. Maybe it's about who you choose to stand with when it matters." He turned to her. "And you think I'm standing with the right people now?" "For the first time," she said. The grand jury hearings began 6 weeks later. Angela testified first. Kenneth followed, his voice steady despite the oxygen tube at his nose. The prosecutors asked him why he'd come forward after all these years. He didn't give them the soundbite they were hoping for. "I woke up," he said simply, "and I realized that for most of my life, I'd been asleep. Asleep to the pain I caused. Asleep to the truth. And now, I can't go back to sleep." It took months, but the verdicts came in. Calder was convicted of manslaughter and obstruction of justice. Greer was found guilty of conspiracy and official misconduct. The headlines were brutal, but this time Kenneth didn't flinch when he saw his name. Because beside it, every time, was Marcus's. Angela visited Marcus's grave alone the day after the verdict. She stood there for a long time, the autumn wind tugging at her coat, and whispered, "It's done." When she turned, Kenneth was standing a few paces back, leaning on a cane. She didn't know how he'd convinced the doctors to let him out, but she didn't ask. They stood in silence for a moment before Kenneth spoke. "I wish I'd met him," he said. Angela looked at the headstone. "You did. You just didn't see him." A week later, Kenneth was discharged from the hospital. Reporters swarmed, but he ignored them. He didn't know what the rest of his life would look like. He was too old to rebuild a career, too infamous to fade into anonymity. But he knew one thing. The darkness he'd been in for 10 years had been nothing compared to the darkness he'd lived in before. And for the first time, he felt like he was walking toward the light. Angela kept working at the hospital. Sometimes she and Kenneth would meet for coffee in the park, talking about nothing in particular. They didn't need to rehash the past anymore. One afternoon, she brought a trumpet case with her. "What's this?" Kenneth asked. "It was Marcus's," she said. "I thought you should hear it." She lifted the instrument to her lips and played a slow, aching melody that hung in the air like a prayer. When she finished, Kenneth's eyes were wet. "That," he said, "is what America should sound like." Angela smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should help it find the right tune." They walked together until the sun dipped low, the shadows stretching long across the grass. For Kenneth Rourke, the road ahead wasn't clean, and it wasn't easy. But for the first time, he was willing to walk Itone's step, one truth, one note at a time. And somewhere in the quiet between them, the ghost of Marcus Brooks finally rested. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.